So we have one more panel before you have your lunch. So you've done really well, 1.5 days of the forum. But before we get to lunch, we have a really interesting panel, and I'm very excited, particularly this one, given the work that we do. The topic is ensuring worker voice through the recruitment process. And before introducing our panelists, just to say, my name is Mustafa Qadri. I'm the CEO of Equidem, which is a human rights organization. We're relatively unique in that we do research on labor rights, human rights issues, and global supply chains. But most of our team are rights holders, migrant workers, low-wage workers, which gives us, really unique access to the reality for workers. But also because they're part of our team, they are paid staff, gives them a lot of ownership and representation within our organization. So for us, the work that we do, worker voice is really key. But critically, around labor rights and human rights, issues around recruitment are very common. And as most of you, I'm sure, would know, illegal recruitment practices is a forced labor indicator. So even if there is a focus on responsible recruitment, as we have heard in this conference, in fact, it's the gateway to either a positive experience for people or for a cycle of exploitation. So with us today, we have Paola Cammilli. She's the Global Campaigns Director at the Building and Woodworkers International. And next to her is Joe Martinez. He's the CEO of CIERTO, an ethical and responsible recruitment firm. So two really interesting perspectives. And if I can ask you, Paola, first to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that your organization does. And let's start with the first principles. Why is worker voice through the recruitment process? Why is that so important?
Sure, thanks Mustafa. Good to be with you today. Joe, this is going to be challenging. We're standing between here and the lunch break. So in half an hour, and we have to address issues of forced labor. Are you ready for that? We need your help.
we have to solve all these problems in the next half an hour.
In the next half an hour. That's what we're trying to do, and that's probably the answer to your question. And it also links to my introduction of what Building and Woodworkers International is. It's a global union federation. For those who are not familiar with the global union movement, we are an international organization composed by 360 trade unions in construction, building materials, wood and forestry around the world in 117 countries, and they all together represent 12 million workers in construction and building material and forestry sector. We have offices. Of course, we have our member organizations in this 117 countries, but we also have offices in the various regions around the world and in key places in the sub-regions like Philippines, Malaysia, but also India, Nepal, Qatar, and many other countries. So I'm emphasizing this because when we speak about migration, it's of course a big part of the workforce in construction, and having this spread of presence around the world helps us connect workers in the country of origin and in the country of destination and across their migration journey, whether it's one-way return or circular. So again, to your question, or to the question that comes before your question probably, that might be something new for some of you, is why trade unions are dealing with recruitment issues. Right? We are normally used or more familiar with the idea that trade unions are there to defend general workers' issues. And this is the answer, actually, because it's about how we approach the issue of recruitment of migrant workers. If we see it as a single model issue or something that has to deal with the endemic labor abuses labor issues in the global labor market. So if we see it as part or exploitative recruitment practices are seen as part of broader issue of labor abuses that you mentioned, or you called forced labor, and forced labor, unfortunately, doesn't come as a big bang, as a big case that explodes all of a sudden. It creeps. It is made of many many indicators, many issues that start with illegal recruitment and exploitative practices at the recruitment phase, but then it moves on, of course, creating situation of debt bondage, wage theft sometimes, or most of the times, and and so on, and, and on and forth. So this is why we are there, and that's one reason why trade unions deal with recruitment, with fair recruitment. The second, and I'll be brief and pass it on to Joe soon after, is because of the title of this session, actually, workers' voice in the process. And I mean, you've been discussing this for 2 days. There's no need for me to reinvent the wheel or repeat things that have been said already. Despite the willingness, despite the good commitments, there is a disconnect between policy commitments and the practice that all of you here in the room and online probably are trying, and all of us here are trying to fill with what we know. And what the unions and the workers' organization can bring into this debate is to make sure, or to try to help, that to close this gap so that the solutions that are thought of are tailored on the needs of the workers. So workers' voice, it's absolutely crucial, it's absolutely important, but it's not enough as well. And here comes my challenge to all of you, and something I'm trying still to find an answer to. So if you can help us move forward from the principle of workers' voice to workers' participation, and participation with agency. What do I mean? We've heard during these discussions how important it is to listen to the workers, to factor in their voices where companies are defining their recruitment policies and monitoring. Who better than the workers actually can say whether the policies work on the ground? Who better than the workers themselves can say what are the challenges that they face? And I'm sure that all of you who've gone around, I'm talking for the employers and the businesses side mostly, but all of you concerned about fair recruitment issues who've gone around with good willingness to speak to workers must have faced a crucial thing, that is the trust of workers. That is their feeling that they can speak with you without fear of retaliation, because if they speak up about an abusive recruitment practice, they might lose their job. Fear, sometimes even language competences or understanding the question, or this trust issue is crucial when you want to get the meaningful participation of the workers. It takes time, and the way for us as trade union to overcome it or to shortcut the system is to allow workers to organize together, because when they are together in an organization of their own choosing, and the speaker before me in the panel spoke about freedom of association and decent work standard, when they are together they can gain that confidence to stand up and speak up for their rights.
Right, that's really an excellent, I think, segue to Joe, and I think some really key points that you've already raised that I'm really keen for us to unpick, and really encourage as well questions at the end of the panel. Joe, over to you. If you could explain a little bit about yourself and your organization. We heard from Paola about the significance not just of worker voice, but of worker participation and agency around trust, and actually knowing what other issues that these workers are facing. Yeah, over to you to build on that.
No, first of all, thank you to the Global Forum of Responsible Recruitment for the invitation. Thank you, Mustafa, for leading this. And I'm excited to share the stage with Paola. I myself, coming from a trade union, from the United Farm Workers in the United States, I'm the 6th iteration in trying to tackle responsible recruitment within the farm worker movement. And with that, that's where CIERTO was born. CIERTO is actually an acronym for Center of Investigation, Training, and Recruitment of the Organized Worker. And I think specifically, Paola touched on those points that we need to commit to, which is trust. Trust can't happen through a transaction. It happens through a relationship. And as a recruiter, which I reluctantly jumped into this industry, my whole focus was to do farm worker rights, stick with the union, and the union asked me, could you focus on creating a farm worker recruitment and training organization? With the premise and notion and recognizing that agriculture in the US, roughly 2.1 million workers back in 2012, 1.6 million of those workers were here irregularly and undocumented, which means agriculture is definitely dependent on a vulnerable population that doesn't know its rights, doesn't know how to navigate systems. And what we want to understand is, how did those workers migrate to the United States and end up in these situations? So CIERTO was born and created as a nonprofit recruitment and training organization with offices in the United States, Mexico, and Guatemala, with a focus on community-based recruitment and ensuring that workers fully understand. One of the things that we have to be sure is that a worker cannot pay for the right to arrive to a job. The second that they've paid, they're no longer going to fully engage. They're focused on paying off that debt. They're no longer focused on making sure that they're harvesting that product to the best possible way, ensuring that they're abiding by the employer's needs, because it's all about survival. We're human beings. We all understand this. So with that, CIERTO really focuses on spending our time in the communities of origin, conducting a 10-module training. Anywhere from what is a recruiter to what is the visa that you're traveling with, what are your rights, listening skills, conflict resolution, continuous improvement plan, understanding the supply chain. And I say this because when we talk about agency, most of the time, migrant workers don't know where they're going half the time. They don't know the job at hand. With CIERTO, they need to know exactly what they're doing before they leave their home. And they need to be committed to it. Because what we're dedicated to is recruiting professional farm workers, professional migrant workers that are going to come and partner with their employer to be able to improve the supply chain, improve economic efficiencies, and overall demonstrate that responsible recruitment, when done correctly, is not just a social sustainable issue, but an economic driver for change that can help alleviate rural economic poverty in the countries of origin and continue to improve our supply chains, our brand integrity, and continuity of supply.
That's pretty fascinating. And I like the idea that, firstly, you have the experience from your trade union background, that realities that you've seen. But then, in terms of root and branch, addressing effectively the supply chain and due diligence, it sounds like from what you're saying, it can't just be a process, but it's actually about creating concrete systems. And we heard from other panelists as well about, you need to be driving the support within the ecosystem of that. I'll come to you, Paola, in a sec about this too, but staying with you, Joe, can you tell us a bit about some of the good practices that you've seen?
Yeah, well, first of all, jumping into this industry, it's not one that's easily done, and it's a challenge. And I think there's a key word here, it's an ecosystem. How do you develop that ecosystem and engage with the actors to ensure that you're putting in the best practices? So CIERTO's been very grateful to be able to collaborate with the International Labor Organization, their Fair Recruitment Initiative, been able to collaborate with the International Office of Migration, their IRIS certification, which we're currently in the process of and have finished the first phase, and alongside with Stronger Together and other folks in this room. We recognize that there's not one model that can solve it, but how do we have a continuous improvement process to bring workers to the forefront? And recognizing that for workers to have agency, they need to truly and fully understand what they're doing, what they're committing to, and recognize that their voice is going to be heard. And so in that instance, involving one of these practices is we really dedicate ourselves in creating a verification process that's predicated on worker voice. And when I say building that trust, it's a relationship, it takes time, we see it as a 2 to 3 year bell curve with any employer. That first year when we're doing this verification survey with NGOs and human rights organizations on the ground in our communities of origin, it takes time for workers to tell you the truth. They're like, I don't know, is this gonna work against me? Am I, as a recruiter, going to blacklist them if they speak up? Are they going to be held responsible? Am I going to retaliate? Is the employer no longer gonna request them if they bring up issues with human resources and grievance mechanisms? All of these things are tested. And to give you just some quick real examples, in our first year when we brought workers, they said, oh, well, could we have a barbecue pit so that we could cook some food on the weekend? And you're thinking, oh, well, that's something simple, no big deal. And then all of a sudden they say, oh, they did it. And then all of a sudden they start to ask for other things. And then slowly over the course of the second and third year, they start to say, well, you know what? The farm manager or the housing manager brandished a gun towards me and told me that I needed to stay quiet and I couldn't complain about the hot water going out. And it's that information that may not necessarily come to the recruiter or the employer, but who does it come to? The family, the community of origin. And the actors that we have in those communities of origin that then feed us a continuous feedback loop to be able to provide that data and information to the employer so that we can try to prevent these issues from becoming systemic and endemic. I'll be honest with you all, we're never going to eradicate trafficking, exploitation, debt peonage. But can we create frameworks within the countries of origin that help us identify them before they expand and become systemic to someone's supply chain?
I mean, to sort of ask you a question, so based on what you said, it sounds like what you've set out there requires time. You mentioned sort of 2 to 5 years, and you and others have mentioned before it's a complex system that you're dealing with. How do you make sure that, particularly the employers, the business community, other stakeholders, stay the course? Because particularly nowadays, everything is so rapid. Often people don't have an appetite for that long-term investment. So how do you ensure that is the case? But again, just trying to aid discussion, but it sounds like what you're painting, the risk is that there are so many things you have to factor in. It can easily be off balanced and the thing doesn't work properly.
No, I think it's a huge risk, and that's why as a recruiter, I stand by my recruitment process. And I think that what we're really trying to demonstrate in CIERTO is what it takes to conduct ethical and responsible recruitment means to have a true knowledge of the candidates that you're selecting, understanding their realities, and explaining to them where they're going. And so if we want full integration, we really take a strong step in speaking with employers, trying to understand the culture and the vision for their company, and translating and facilitating that to the workers that are going to be selected. And in turn, yes, it is a relationship. It's going to be a back and forth. It's going to take time. But overall, what we have been able to see with the clients that we're working with, and I'm excited to share that we've now been working for over a decade, and we now have some actual documented proof to demonstrate that this is actually having a workforce that's actually going to be more retainable, lowering absenteeism and abscondment, and actually improving productivity. And at the end of the day, when we've been speaking with our employers within the US context, is if you can help us increase productivity anywhere from 4 to 7%, the true cost of responsible recruitment is covered. And so in that framework, we've actually been able to demonstrate with some of our clients where we've been able to demonstrate that productivity can increase from 2 to 7% year after year, with the retention rates increasing, with folks coming back around 90 to 99% with the folks that we work with. And it's that type of dependability and responsibility where workers now start to see and say, hey, I can actually create a career out of this migration. And I think one important aspect for workers having agency over there is seeing a migration as a means for them to fulfill their dreams and have self-actualization. So a huge part of our training isn't just understanding where you're going and what you're doing. What's the purpose of this migration? What is the dream of Jose? What is the dream of Aldo? What is the dream of Maria to be able to create for themselves so that they can retire from the need to have to migrate and be away from their families? And how do we partner with organizations in the community of origin to see that to come fruition and have employers document the impact of what they're doing and creating the positive outcomes for their workers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really powerful because, ultimately what you're talking about is, seeing workers as actually partners in the business, and the scope of actually changing people's lives is huge. The workers themselves and obviously their dependents as well. Paola, so you mentioned when you started talking about, moving from worker voice to participation. Talk to us about the experiences that BWI has had in terms of obviously identifying when unethical recruitment is happening, but seeking to address them, and why, in your view, trade unions, not just worker voice, not just some form of worker representation, is critical to addressing it when you find those practices.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mustafa. I was just reflecting on what you two just said. I mean, one of the first sentences you said is that building trust is not a transactional issue. So it comes from a dialogue, and that dialogue takes time. That's exactly what you've said when you echoed his point, saying workers can be partners. So it can't be seen, they shouldn't be seen as passive agents, but active agents with their own dignity that can sit at the table and find together a solution. So here is another key element for us, which is the willingness, the political will actually, to sit together and look in the same direction to find a solution. And if you look at workers not as a passive group who should be given rights, and of course they should be protected, and but that have their own voice their own needs and their own perspective on things. So if you treat them with dignity, and that means also from our side as trade union to work a lot on building that capacity and confidence to speak up and dissipate their fears and all the things you said before, Joe, if they can sit at the table with the same dignity as the employers, so as a group normally, that's why they organize into trade unions and they don't negotiate or bargain individually or alone, then the best solutions, the win-win solutions can be found both for the workers and the companies, as you said. So that's the basic principle. But then, again, you went on touching on issues that refer to redressing fundamentally unbalanced power relations between employers and workers. And this is a systemic issue. We can try to spot or single out situations where we found and support, of course, the workers in this, where right now, where we found abuse, right now we are handling or we are supporting legally more than 150 workers who were recruited in India, transferred to Serbia to work for a US-based company, and of course through a legal recruitment process they had to pay recruitment fees, and we didn't know that until union members, Serbian union members, entered the site and found these workers and reported these workers to the
sorry,
union.
the figure's 150,000 people.
No, 150.
150.
150.
Which is still a very large
150
number.
Working in a US-based company, same number working for a Chinese-based company
Yeah.
in the same city, in the same region. So we can spot these cases when workers are on the side, when unions are on the construction side, report it and try to solve it and get the workers. Of course, these workers were also withheld their passports, they weren't being paid their due wages, and so on. So all the, as we said before, all the elements of forced labor that come together when you find there's flesh in the pan, a situation that is so shocking that you have to activate the communities, the workers, because again, if you are a worker in a country of destination, you might not feel so confident to speak about your problems or the debt bondage situation you're in, but you might feel more confident to speak about your community members or people back home. And that's why creating this connection cross borders and with the communities is absolutely fundamental, and working together with other organizations is too. I mean, trade unions can't do work alone. They don't operate in a vacuum. They, of course, negotiate with employers, and I appreciate very much, for example, the commitment of employers construction companies, also here in the room, who've gone through the process of sitting down with trade unions, giving equal dignity to the workers to get to international framework agreements, for example, in the case of Qatar, that also entail training of workers, raising their awareness, building their capacity to spot issues at the workplace, because there is where also issues of recruitment will come out. And if auditors or inspectors come for a short time, 1 day, 2 days on a site, and then they leave, who stays on the site to continuously monitor what happens day by day? So there is where the agency of workers and their openness or that confidence to speak out comes out. And again, trade unions, workers are on the site, but I spoke before about the situation in Serbia. While it was a worker, a trade union member, who spotted the situation on the work site, trade unions couldn't raise enough public pressure to raise the issue outside the workplace without human rights group and NGOs joining together with the trade unions and try to speak about it and to report about it. So Mustafa and others here in the room are very much aware that we have a very similar case involving more than 20,000 workers in Saudi Arabia who've been waiting to be repaid their due wages for 10 years now, so it is quite a fair amount of time to get your wages repaid. And again, if you're speaking with these workers, from all the testimonies, having your wages withheld goes together with having gone through a recruitment process that is not fair and not ethical. So yeah, these are just a few examples to say, of course, we got to protect the workers when these situations arise and support them in their legal case, in trying to get a remediation, trying to get the recruitment fee repaid. But what we are also looking at is the non-repetition of the issue. And this is where trust, dialogue, negotiation, treating the workers' representative and the workers' group with the same dignity as a partner, actually, and as employer, and working together is needed to make sure that not only you remedy, but you also redress and make sure that the situation of abuse doesn't happen again.
Thank you for that. So we have a few minutes left to take some questions. I understand that some questions we have from the audience.
Yes, two quick ones. So first of all, I just want to kind of disagree with Paula a bit. We
there
have
you
a
go.
panel on complexities after lunchtime. So I think that's a much tougher sell than this panel. Imagine coming back for complexities after lunch. So, all right, two quick questions. One is for Joe. Following on previous round of questions, that's trying to understand more of these granular details on how we can do ethical recruitment. So one question on if candidates are rejected in your recruitment process, how are they treated and how are they informed? And the second question is a broad one. How do you build trust in the supply chain when the power is so imbalanced, as you said?
Questions? Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so first and foremost, when we go through our recruitment process, we do have some very clear indicators on what's required to be a candidate for a recruitment practice. We don't do open recruitment. We do a closed recruitment process. We select communities specifically through various databases that help us identify the best possible candidates in areas that have experience within the commodity or the area of work. Then we overlay that with a level of NGO, human rights organizations, and religious organizations that may be present within the community of origin. So that when we enter a community, we know we're engaging with folks that actually live there, belong there, and know what we're there to do. And at the same time, if there's an individual that is not eligible, for instance, if we're able to receive their information, I found that they have had previous issues with immigration on the way to the US, we will inform them and try to give them an opportunity to be able to be part of a different recruitment process, maybe internally in Mexico. And so the notion for us is that they're not just out and we leave them alone. It's like, how do we partner with them to give them other opportunities that maybe not might be susceptible for the programs that we're offering? On those same lines, unfortunately, we can't provide it to everyone, and there are times that there are workers that join our recruitment processes hoping to game the system, to learn of our approach so that they can then go out there and mimic us. And so we have to be careful on multiple different fronts, right? The reality is that vulnerability and corruption are always going to be present when there's vulnerable populations. And so we can't be naive to that, but at the same time, we predicate ourselves on being able to walk hand in hand with workers and being able to also connect them to other organizations within their community of origin that might be able to provide a path forward.
Thanks, Joe, for that. And Paola, maybe you can take the second question, and Joe, if you want to quickly say anything after her, but how do you build trust across the stakeholders around worker voice in the recruitment process?
Yeah, shall the next panel on complexity take this question after lunch? Exactly.
After lunch, yeah, that's the critical
I'll try
point.
to be clear. Of course, we don't have the magic bullet for building trust. It takes everybody's willingness to sit around the table and identify solution together from the inception. And I want to insist on this because you can't find with a solution and expect the workers to feel ownership of the solution if they're not part of it from the inception. Then there are many other regulatory steps that can be taken, but of course they have to go hand in hand with inspections and implementation. That's always where the main challenges are. And I mean, they are specific by sector. If I look at construction, we have very long subcontracting chains, and this is where the abuses mostly are found. So why not limit subcontracting, for example? It takes, again, political will, and once it is done, and in some countries they are trying to, it takes enforcement and implementation. In other countries it's just not possible because the interests to deregulate and liberalize the subcontracting chain are just too strong, and that's where the power imbalance unfortunately is, and that's why it takes all hands on deck to and the help of everybody to sit around the table and build systems that are resilient, that serve the workers and that serves the employers. There is one challenge I want to leave you with for your lunch. Ukraine will require, the reconstruction of Ukraine will require 100,000 workers, which are not available right now in Ukraine. That means there will be mostly migrant workers. And as the plans are made right now, maybe it's also too soon to speak about reconstruction, but there are discussions about reconstruction of Ukraine. What time is now to think about how to recruit these 800,000 workers and build systems where the worker's voice is tailored in from the onset. Procurement, investors, everybody can leverage its own share of power to make sure that standards are decent, that workers' rights are protected from the recruitment phase to the employment and sometimes the
entire cycle. It's really interesting because, and we have to close off now. So thank you so much. But just to say very quickly that hearing you both makes me think of the fact that in many ways you're talking about actually democracy in the workplace. You're talking about you have workers, people have citizens' voices to an extent to complain about their local community. But when you're a worker in a transnational supply chain, often you don't have that. So really key points. It's such a shame we're only at half an hour, but also we don't want to keep you away from your lunch. You've all been brilliant today. So please join me in thanking Paola and Joe for a really thought-provoking discussion.
Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. Always a pleasure.